The German Sixth Army was supposed to be dead already. In February of 1943, it froze and starved to a standstill in the ruins of Stalingrad. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered what was left of it, and roughly 91,000 men marched east into Soviet captivity. It was the most famous defeat in the history of the German army, the moment the whole war turned. The Sixth Army, on paper, ceased to exist. So how do you explain the fact that, 18 months later, the German Sixth Army was standing in eastern Romania, rebuilt from scratch, holding the line that guarded Hitler's last major source of oil? Hitler had done something almost superstitious. He took the number of his most catastrophic loss, stamped it onto a fresh set of divisions, and sent them south to guard the thing he could not afford to lose. Same name, same designation. A second Sixth Army, raised to replace the ghost of the first. And in 10 days, in August of 1944, the Red Army did to the second one exactly what it had done to the first. It surrounded it, cut it off from any hope of rescue, and took it apart. 2 Sixth Armies. 2 encirclements. The same terrible arithmetic run twice. This is the story of the Jassy-Kishinev Offensive, the operation the Soviets themselves nicknamed the Canis on the Prut, and how, in a little over a week, the Red Army did not just defeat an army. It collapsed an entire German army group, knocked Romania out of the war, and kicked open the door to the Balkans. Bucharest, the summer of 1944. By this point, the war in the east had a rhythm to it, and the rhythm belonged to the Red Army. To understand why the Southern Front cracked the way it did, you have to understand what had just happened 800 miles to the north. In late June, the Soviets had launched Operation Bagration into Belarus, and Bagration was not an ordinary offensive. It was one of the most complete victories of the entire war. In a matter of weeks, it did not merely push the Germans back. It swallowed Army Group Center whole, one of the 3 great German army groups on the Eastern Front, and left a gap hundreds of miles wide where a fortified line used to be. That victory did 2 things that set up everything you are about to see. First, it forced the German High Command to strip reserves from every other sector and rush them north to plug the hole in the center. That included armor and mobile troops that might otherwise have been sitting in Romania. Second, it proved the new Soviet method worked. Mass, overwhelming force in secret, strike where the enemy is weakest, break through, and then send armor racing into the rear to close a ring before the defender can react. Bagration was the rehearsal. Romania was the encore. While the world watched the center, the southern flank of the front had gone quiet, and quiet is where this story lives. After the first Soviet attempts to break into Romania that spring had been fought to a halt, the sector around the cities of Jassy and Kishinev settled into an uneasy stillness. The Germans convinced themselves that stillness meant safety. They looked at the calm front and told themselves the danger was elsewhere, up north where Bagration was still burning. It was a fatal misreading. Guarding this sector was Army Group South Ukraine, under Field Marshal Johannes Friesner. On the map it looked substantial, close to 900,000 men. But that number hid a rot at the core of it. Roughly half of those men were not German at all. They were Romanian, from the Romanian 3rd and 4th Armies, and Romania in the summer of 1944 was a country whose heart had already left the war. The German portion of the group was built around that rebuilt 6th Army, now commanded by General Maximilian Fretta-Pico, standing alongside part of the German 8th Army. And here is the detail that should have kept Friesner awake. His army group had close to 900,000 men and fewer than 200 tanks to give them a mobile punch. Some of that shortfall traced straight back to Bagration, which had devoured the reserves. He was guarding the most strategically vital ground in southeastern Europe with a force that could hold a line but could not maneuver, could not counterattack in strength, could not save itself if the line broke. Why did this ground matter so much? One word: Ploiesti. The oil fields at Ploiesti, just north of Bucharest, supplied roughly 60% of all the oil Nazi Germany imported. Every German tank engine, every fighter plane, every submarine diesel, a huge share of it traced back to those refineries. Hitler had said out loud that the life of the Axis depended on those fields. Lose Romania, and you lose the fuel. Lose the fuel, and the mechanized German war machine simply rolls to a stop. Fresner was not really defending Romania. He was defending the tank of gas that kept the entire German war effort running, and everyone from Berlin down understood it. Facing him, the Red Army had assembled a hammer. Two entire fronts, which in Soviet terms meant two full army groups, were stacked opposite Army Group South Ukraine. To the north stood the Second Ukrainian Front under General Rodion Malinovsky. To the south, across the lower Dniester, stood the Third Ukrainian Front under General Fyodor Tolbukin. Between them, they fielded over 1,300,000 men and close to 1,900 tanks and assault guns. Against Fresner's fewer than 200, that is not a battle of equals. That is a landslide waiting for someone to give the word. But raw numbers were not the plan. The plan was geometry. Malinovsky and Tolbukin were not going to grind straight into the German line and trade casualties for yards. They were going to attack on two widely separated axes, north and south, punch through the weak points, and then swing the two spearheads toward each other behind the enemy, snapping shut like a pair of jaws. Encircle everything in the middle, cut it off, then reduce the trapped pocket at leisure. Understand the mechanics of what a double envelopment actually asks of an army, because it is far harder than it sounds. You are not launching one attack, you are launching two, tens of miles apart, and both of them have to succeed on schedule. If one jaw breaks through and the other stalls, you do not get a pocket. You get a single deep salient that the enemy can pinch off and destroy in turn. Both spearheads have to break the line. Both have to push armor into the enemy rear at speed. And both have to navigate toward a meeting point that neither can see, all while the enemy is trying to react. The Red Army of 1944 could do this now. 3 years earlier it could not. That difference is the real story underneath the map. Soviet planners looked at this design and thought of Cannes, the ancient battle where Hannibal wrapped his line around a larger Roman army and destroyed it from all sides at once. That is the model they were reaching for. A double envelopment on a scale the 20th century had rarely seen, and they had picked their breakthrough points with cold precision. Both spearheads would strike not at the hardened German divisions, but at the flanks held by the Romanians, the part of the line most likely to give way. They had studied the enemy order of battle and aimed their heaviest blows precisely at its softest seams. This is the part everyone would later point to as the masterstroke, and we will get to exactly why it worked. On the 20th of August 1944, the stillness ended. The Soviet artillery opened first, and it opened like the end of the world. On the Second Ukrainian Front sector, thousands of guns, mortars and rocket launchers concentrated onto a narrow breakthrough zone, hammering the forward Axis positions into pulp before a single Soviet infantryman stood up. Soviet doctrine by this stage did not sprinkle its artillery evenly along the front. It stacked it, hundreds of barrels packed into each mile of the chosen breakthrough sector, so that where the blow landed, the defending line was simply overwhelmed. This was the Red Army of 1944, not the improvising force of 1941. This was a machine that had learned, at brutal cost, exactly how to break a fixed line. Malinovsky's men struck between the town of Targu Frumos and the city of Jassy, and they hit the Romanian Fourth Army. The result was immediate. The forward Axis defences buckled under the weight of the bombardment, and where the line held at all, it held in fragments. Within hours, the Soviets had torn a gap in the front. And then Malinovsky did the thing that turns a breakthrough into a catastrophe. He fed in his exploitation force, the 6th Tank Army, and sent it driving deep into the enemy rear. Its orders were specific and merciless. Race for the crossings over the Siret River. Seize the Foksani Gate, the narrow corridor that any German force in Romania would have to funnel through to escape north. In other words, do not just break the line. Get behind the 6th Army and lock the only door it could run through. This is the difference between pushing an enemy back and destroying him. A push takes ground. Getting behind him takes the whole army. To the south, Tolbukin's Third Ukrainian Front launched its own bombardment across the Dniester and smashed into the Romanian Third Army. Same pattern. Same result. The southern jaw was moving now too, and it was moving fast, because it had hit exactly the seam the planners had chosen for it. The Axis flanks did not bend. They shattered. The two Romanian armies, the third on the south and the fourth in the north, had been placed exactly where the Soviets chose to concentrate, and they came apart under the pressure. This was not simple cowardice, and it is worth being clear about that. These were men fighting far from a homeland they knew was on the verge of leaving the war entirely, told to die in place for a German cause that most Romanians had never wanted. Their equipment was older than the Germans. Their morale was hollowed out by 4 years of a war fought largely on Hitler's behalf, and rumours of a coming political break were everywhere in their ranks. When the Soviet spearheads hit them at full weight, the Romanian formations broke, and once the flanks were gone, the whole German position in between was standing on air. That is the thing about a strong centre anchored by weak flanks. The centre can be the best army in the world, and it does not matter. If the ground on either side of you dissolves, you are not a fortress anymore. You are a target in a box that is about to close. The German divisions in the middle were still fighting hard, still intact, and every hour they held their ground, they were simply making the pocket around themselves more complete. Field Marshal Friesner could see it happening. The reports coming into his headquarters described not a dented line but a collapsing one, both shoulders caving inward at once. He asked Hitler's headquarters for permission to pull the Sixth Army back before the two Soviet spearheads met behind it, to trade ground for survival while there was still a gap to slip through. That permission came slowly, grudgingly, and hedged with conditions about holding this town and that river line. And on this front, in these days, slowly was the same as never. Because the 6th Tank Army was already deep in the German rear, and the door was already swinging shut. Before we go further, one thing worth sitting with. Every officer in that German 6th Army knew the number stitched onto their formation. They knew what the 6th Army meant. They had grown up in an army that spoke of Stalingrad in hushed tones, the place where a whole army had vanished into the snow. And now, here they were, wearing that same ghost's name, watching two Soviet fronts curl around behind them in exactly the shape they had all read about. History does not usually rhyme this precisely. This time it did. By the 23rd of August, 3 days into the offensive, the two Soviet jaws met. Malinovsky's spearheads coming down from the north and Tobolkin's coming up from the south linked hands behind the German 6th Army, and the ring closed. Inside it, cut off from supply, from reinforcement, from any line of retreat, sat the bulk of the German forces in Romania. Estimates run to roughly 18 to 20 German divisions trapped in the pocket, the whole of the 6th Army plus a substantial part of the 8th. For the second time in the war, and under the same name, a German 6th Army was encircled by converging Soviet fronts. The divisions caught inside were not nobodies. Some of them were formations that had rebuilt themselves after Stalingrad and fought hard in the long retreats across Ukraine. Armoured strength was there too. The 13th Panzer Division and the 10th Panzer Grenadier Division among the units sealed inside the ring. These were experienced, dangerous soldiers, exactly the kind of veteran corps that in an open battle could give any attacker a very bad day. And it did not save them, because encirclement is not a fair fight. Once you are cut off, your fuel does not refill, your ammunition only shrinks, and every hour the walls of the pocket grind inward. The best soldiers in the world cannot shoot rounds they do not have or drive tanks with empty tanks. And then, on the very same day the ring closed, the ground shifted under the Germans in a way no battlefield could fit. On the 23rd of August, in Bucharest, King Michael I of Romania made his move. The young king had summoned the dictator Ion Antonescu, the man who had chained Romania to Germany, to the royal palace. Michael asked him directly to accept an armistice and take Romania out of the war. Antonescu refused. He insisted the Germans would simply tear up any armistice, and he would not commit to one, least of all with the Soviet Union. It was the wrong answer to give in a palace where the king had already decided what came next. On Michael's signal, a small detachment of soldiers walked in and arrested the Prime Minister on the spot. That night, at 10 in the evening, King Michael went on the radio and told his country the truth. Antonescu was gone. Romania was accepting the armistice offered by the Allies. Romania was leaving the Axis. And within days, Romania declared war on Germany itself. Think about what that did to the trapped German army. Overnight, the country they were standing in stopped being an ally and became an enemy. The Romanian soldiers on their flanks were no longer wavering partners, they were now on the other side. The rear areas the Germans had counted on for supply, for movement, for the roads home, turned hostile in a single broadcast. Bridges they needed were now held by men who wanted them gone. The pocket was already sealed by Soviet steel. Now the entire nation around it had flipped. For the German Sixth Army, this was the trapdoor underneath the trap. They were not just surrounded on the map, they were surrounded inside a country that had just declared it wanted them gone. Now, with the door shut and Romania switching sides, the fate of the encircled army was no longer really in question. The only question left was how fast the end would come. Inside the pocket, the German command tried to organize a breakout, because a breakout is the only card an encircled army has left to play. Fight in one direction, all at once, and try to punch a hole toward the west before the ring hardens. Some units did break into motion, abandoning heavy equipment they could no longer fuel, forming into columns, clawing toward the Siret and the Foxani Gate, toward the corridor that meant home. It was a desperate, disciplined effort, exactly what a professional army is supposed to attempt. But the 6th Tank Army was already sitting on that corridor. The very crossings and the very gate the Germans needed were exactly what Malinovsky had sent his armour to seize on day one. The escape route had been closed before most of the trapped men even understood they were trapped. Breakout columns ran straight into Soviet armour and infantry that were dug in and waiting on the high ground and the river lines, and they were beaten back into the shrinking pocket. Every failed attempt cost the Germans more of the fuel, the ammunition, and the cohesion they could not replace. The pocket did not have to be stormed so much as starved and squeezed. Friesner, outside the ring now, tried to scrape together a relief effort. But with fewer than 200 tanks in the entire army group at the start, and the Romanian half of that army group gone or turned, there was simply nothing left to relieve them with. The mobile reserve that might have punched a corridor open did not exist. It had never really existed. The whole army group had been a shell of numbers with no muscle behind it, and now the shell was cracking everywhere at once. There would be no rescue because there was nothing left to send. Over the following days, the pocket did what encircled pockets do. It fragmented. Cut off from fuel, the tanks and vehicles that could not move became fixed positions, then became scrap. Cut off from ammunition, the artillery went silent battery by battery. Soviet forces compressed the pocket from all sides, splitting it into smaller pockets, and then splitting those. Command and control broke down as headquarters lost contact with the units they were supposed to direct. Formations that had existed for years as coherent fighting units simply came apart into scattered groups of men with no orders, no supply, and nowhere to go. This is the anatomy of a modern encirclement, and it is worth understanding because it explains why the numbers at the end are so staggering. An encircled army does not lose gradually, trading evenly with its enemy. It hits a point of collapse and then it goes all at once, like a dam that holds and then does not. Resistance can look organized one day and be gone the next, because the thing that breaks is not the courage of the men, it is the supply, the fuel, the ammunition, and the chain of command that lets an army function as an army at all. The German 6th Army had reached that point. While the pocket was being reduced, the rest of the Red Army was not standing still. This is the part that separates Jassy-Kishinev from an ordinary encirclement. The Soviets did not stop to admire the trap. They left a portion of their strength to finish the pocket and drove the rest straight on, deeper into Romania, before the Germans could improvise any new line to stop them. With Army Group South Ukraine gone as a fighting force, there was nothing solid left between the Red Army and the great prizes of Romania. Soviet columns drove south and west against almost no organized resistance. Moldova was cleared, and the two objectives that had made this whole sector matter came within reach almost immediately. On the 30th of August, Soviet forces reached Ploiesti, the oil fields that Hitler had called the life of the Axis, the roughly 60% of German oil imports, the fuel that kept the panzers running, passed out of German hands. Not damaged, not contested. Taken. In a single stroke, the German war machine lost its single largest source of petroleum, and no amount of fighting anywhere else on the front could put that fuel back in the tanks. Every offensive Germany might still dream of was now competing for a smaller and shrinking pool of fuel. The very next day, on the 31st of August, the Red Army entered Bucharest, the Romanian capital, now the capital of a country that had joined the Allied side. In under 2 weeks, the Soviets had gone from a quiet, stalled sector to standing in the enemy's capital city, with the enemy's oil supply in their pocket. So let us total up what those 10 days actually cost the German side, because the figures are almost hard to believe. Army Group South Ukraine, as a fighting formation, was destroyed. Up to 135,000 German casualties, over 200,000 German soldiers captured, and that number includes the command of the 6th Army itself, the same designation, remember, that had already been marched into captivity once at Stalingrad. Roughly 18 to 20 German divisions eliminated from the German order of battle. This was not a defeat that a unit recovers from and rebuilds over the winter. This was, for the second time, the 6th Army being wiped from the map. And here is the number that tells you how lopsided it really was. The Soviet cost for all of this came to about 67,130 casualties, of whom 13,197 were killed. Set that against over 200,000 Germans captured alone, and you see the shape of it. The Red Army did not win a slugging match here. It won a battle of design, where careful planning meant its own men paid a fraction of the price the enemy paid. That ratio is the signature of an army that has learned its trade, one that spends preparation and geometry so that it does not have to spend as many lives. Stalin would later list Jassy-Kishinev among what Soviet history is called the 10 Great Blows of 1944, the series of hammer strikes that broke the German army across the whole Eastern Front in a single year. And of all 10, this may be the most efficient, the most result for the least cost. An entire army group and an entire enemy country removed from the war in 10 days. Now think back to where we started. The German 6th Army was supposed to be dead already. It died at Stalingrad in the winter of 1943, 91,000 men into the snow. Hitler rebuilt it, gave it the same proud number, and posted it to guard the oil that kept his war alive. And in August of 1944, the Red Army found it there, wrapped a double envelopment around it in 3 days, and finished the job it had started a year and a half earlier. Same name, same trap, same ending. The only thing that changed was the season. But the deeper lesson of Jassy-Kishinev is not really about one unlucky army with a cursed number. It is about what the Red Army had become by 1944. This was not the force that had been reeling backward in 1941. This was an army that could pick the exact weak points in a front hundreds of miles long, mass overwhelming force in secret, strike 2 axes at once, and close a ring around an entire army group with the precision of a mathematical proof. Bagration had done it in the centre. Jassy-Kishinev did it in the south. The German army was no longer being pushed back. It was being taken apart, piece by named piece, on a timetable the Soviets set. And the consequences did not stop at the Romanian border. This is where those 10 days reshaped the whole war in the southeast. With Romania flipped and its oil gone, the entire German position in the Balkans became untenable overnight. German forces spread across Greece, Yugoslavia, and the Aegean suddenly found their line of retreat threatened from behind, and a long, dangerous withdrawal north began. Bulgaria would follow Romania out of the Axis within weeks, switching sides as the Red Army approached its border. The road into Hungary and toward the heart of Central Europe lay open, and the fighting would move onto ground that had been far behind the front only days before. One offensive, 10 days, and the whole southern wing of the German war effort came down like a shelf pulled off a wall, taking allies, oil, and defensible geography with it. The first 6th Army got the fame because Stalingrad became a legend. The second 6th Army got almost nothing, a footnote in a summer crowded with Soviet victories. But the men who planned Jassy-Kishinev understood exactly what they had done. They had taken Hitler's most haunted number and proven that the outcome was never about the name at all. It was about who held the initiative, who had learned the harder lessons, and who could turn a map into a cage. Twice the Germans wrote the number 6 on an army and sent it east. Twice the Red Army sent it home in the same condition. And the second time, They did it in 10 days and took a country and an oil empire along with it. If you want to see the operation that set the stage for all of this, the offensive that swallowed Army Group Center and taught the German army that no line was safe, watch our breakdown of Operation Bagration next. It is on screen now.